on a Saturday, talking
Yes.
about another interesting thing that I didn't know existed. As usual, we'll wait just a little bit before we talk. Before we go into what we're talking about, right? And of course, this is our series, right? Our Causeway
Causeway
conversations,
conversation.
stations bridging the sustainability gap. I like that title. I have to say so.
Yes, it's great. So Frida, I mean, it's blue skies here in Singapore. I have to
Yes,
ask, is it blue skies where you are in Malaysia,
it
in
is.
Kuala Lumpur?
It is blue skies, but we've been getting a lot of rain, and I think that is. I was just listening to the news. There was a reason for that we're getting a lot of rain, and it should taper by next week. And of course, normally we don't get this much rain. And the thing is, in a couple of months, rain's gonna happen again.
Rainy
So
season.
yeah, rain season in November. So that's happening again. So exciting, but so not.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
Well, I
we
just
weren't.
came back from
We sorry, you saying?
no, sorry, I was saying I just came back from South Korea where they were hit very heavily with the typhoon. So I did witness the drastic change from blue skies to rainy, gloomy skies
Okay.
very quickly. So yeah, the weather
Okay.
can change.
Okay, but of course, in our context, we're talking about the issue of pollution. So,
Yes.
according to the World Health Organization, air pollution is the single greatest environmental risk to human health and one of the main avoidable causes of death and disease globally. And of course, we realize how important air was right covering our face. So, around 7 million premature deaths across the world are attributed to air pollution. It's scary, right? With
Very
99% of the entire global population still breathing air that exceeds air quality limits. And if you've been to certain parts of the world, like I have seen bad air, right? So air pollution is also closely linked to climate change, biodiversity loss, social and gender parity, as well as economic development.
Yes, so to raise awareness and to promote action on this, every September 7th marks the UN's International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. So this year's theme was the air we share, which focuses on the transboundary nature of air pollution, stressing the need for collective accountability on and action. So very happy to be joined this morning by Rajasekhar Balasubramaniam, who is Professor and Deputy Head Communications and Engagement at the National University of Singapore. Good
Good
morning to
morning.
you, Professor.
Good
Good.
morning, Professor. And before we get to our first question, of course, people listening in, if you have any questions, do type it
Oh,
in the
yes,
chat and we'll get the professor to answer it.
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, Professor, thank you again for joining us. And I just really want to ask, we'll start by asking, can you share the importance of addressing air pollution in order to tackle both the health and also the climate impacts of air pollution?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Quite often people tend to think that air pollution, climate change, and public health are separate entities. And so
Right.
we try to address these challenges rather in isolation. But in reality, climate change, air pollution, and public health are closely and intimately interlinked with each
Mm,
other. Like, for example, air pollution and climate change are caused by pollutants that emanate from the same source. For example, burning fossil fuels and as well as burning solid fuel indoor, especially in some developing countries.
Right.
So these two sources of pollution, also cause climate change, of course, on a much larger scale. So having said that, as Freda, mentioned before, continued exposure of billions of people to air pollution
yeah.
every single day could lead to a variety of health hazards, including premature deaths. And again, as Freda highlighted before, globally we lose about 7 million people every year prematurely because of exposure to both outdoor and indoor air pollution.
Right.
So air pollution is especially important for the sensitive members of the human population. But in particular, we are talking about the elderly as well as children and infants. So in the case of
Gosh.
infants and children, the immune system is not fully developed. But on the other hand, for the elderly, the immune system tends to be weaker as compared to healthy adults
Hmm.
to the effects of air pollution. But at the
Right.
same time, air pollution also causes chronic illnesses including cardiovascular diseases, respiratory diseases, and so on and so forth. So it's a serious issue.
Right.
But at the same time, climate change also leads to heat waves. So the exposure to heat stress could lead to heat stroke, heat exhaustion. It
Right.
can also worsen pre-existing health issues, including respiratory illnesses and so on. So in that regard, public health is central in terms of formulating policies that will allow us to do decarbonization, which would not only lead to net zero carbon emissions, but also zero air pollution at the same time. So, public health is an important platform for us to bring together and discuss issues related to air pollution and climate change. It's like, the two sides of the same coin. And we have air pollution on one side and then climate change on the other side. So we need to have an integrated approach
Right.
to sort of study, analyze, and figure out as to how we could solve these two challenges as effectively and as early as possible.
Right. Anyway, hi Andrea, hi Shalini. Something you also mentioned, I think, like, especially in the last 10, 20 years, right? We every year we'll get the haze, right? And it's so predictable. We know there's some burning going on. And the main sources of air pollution are vehicles, power stations, and refineries, of course, the burning as well. But what are the challenges in addressing this in everyday life?
Oh yeah, okay. So in terms of vehicles, like as you know, cities are expanding horizontally, mainly because of increased urban population, human population. So on top of that, we also have industrialization and urbanization happening, and rather rapidly. So as a result, the cities are expanding very fast in a horizontal manner, and so people tend to commute to work from wherever they live to the central part of the city and then go back. So in that regard, using vehicles is important for commuters. And in addition to that, because of increased manufacturing, we try to supply goods and services using vehicles as well. So in terms of containing air pollution from vehicles is a challenge
Right.
because we have vehicles of different types in terms of
Right.
age, physical age. They also use different fuels, like
Right.
for example, diesel versus gasoline, and they also use different emission control technologies. In addition, driving habits also vary among commuters, and the road conditions also vary at the same time. You may have a strong elevation or otherwise. In addition, we can also have a lot of traffic lights and so on. So the question is like, how do you really quantify as to how much of air pollution arises from vehicles alone? And but having said that, what's more important for us to move forward is to encourage the use of non-motorized transport,
Right.
like active mobility, and discourage the use of motorized transport. It's
Right.
easier said than done.
Right.
And
Easy.
because people would like to be mobile, they want to be independent. And although public transport is important, uh, people tend to have their own excuses as to why they would like to drive
Right.
using their own private cars.
Right.
So
Yes.
typically in cities, about 70% of the total number of vehicles will be more like private cars.
Right.
It's something that needs attention. And the next source, as I mentioned, would be power, electricity production, power stations. So where we use, as of now, mostly fossil fuels. About 80% of global energy is generated by fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. And the bad news about such power stations, you can turn them off and turn them on as and when you need. At the same time, you can also adjust the performance of power plants to match your demand for electricity. And fossil fuels are cheap until recently. And so that's one of the challenges we have. Now, moving on about the other source. So what are the third one you mentioned?
The
Refineries.
Yeah.
Refineries.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we need oil of better quality. And so we bring in crude oil, we do the refining so we can supply gasoline and diesel of much better quality. But in the process of refining crude oil, we also end up emitting pollutants from such sources. And refineries are the sources of economy. And why would you give up refining, when it generates income? So putting all these things together, it becomes increasingly important to look at the common thread over here. The common thread is again fossil fuels.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of conversation about electric vehicles and
Yes.
hydrogen and all that, but it's not so simple as well in that sense, right? Just to say hi to yet me and Andrea. Yes, we can have a chat about that, and Sadhana. Sorry, on to you, Rayan.
Yeah, no, Prof Bala, thank you so much for sharing that, because actually I went to Vietnam last month, and with your thoughts on public transport, they are really trying to get a lot of motorcycles off the road by 2025. And I was talking to I had a tour guide there, and he said people still don't, even though they are improving the transport system, they don't really want to use it. They're still so used to having their motorbikes, they're still so used to having their cars. So that is something that you touched on. And even about turning off and on factories, that is something that we kind of did see in 2020 with the global lockdowns. And we did see air quality actually during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. We did see air quality improve. So do you think that there have been any lessons that have learned for communities around the globe to build back better in that sense?
Yeah, well, COVID-19 provided an unprecedented opportunity for us to do some natural experiments to find out the kind of air pollution control policies, whatever we have formulated and implemented, are indeed effective or otherwise. So in case we realize that the existing air pollution control policies need some fine tuning or some revamping, we can do that. So in that regard, COVID-19 played an important role. But then if we trace back as to what has really happened in the peak of COVID-19 in the year 2020 and 2021, we were asked to do telecommuting. So basically, we remained home wherever we used to live and then work from there. So that it was a curtailment of human activities on a large scale, because the consequences of doing anything otherwise would have a long-term impacts on our health, or other life, also livelihood at the same time. So at that point in time, what we realized is that there's a dramatic decrease in carbon emissions,
Right.
especially during circuit breaker period that we had in Singapore, or lockdown measures implemented in other countries. And so the urban mobility was almost halted, except that we had essential transportation services, especially public transport. So that provided an important message for us. So do we really have to use private cars? Can we not use public transport? So if we do car light or car free zones, that will actually improve not only air quality, but also will allow us to mitigate climate change as soon as we can. But at the same time, we have done an interesting experiment to find out if there is a real improvement in air quality. Yes, there was improvement in air quality, but we were surprised. Some air pollutants rather increased in contrast to what we would expect. And one example is the so-called ozone. So ozone is a secondary air pollutant, which is closely linked with respiratory diseases and so on. So in contrast to what you would expect under blue sky conditions, the concentration of ozone rather increased because the chemistry of the atmosphere became more favorable under pollution-free blue sky conditions. So that actually rang the bell. Whatever policies that we have introduced years ago probably did not work as well as we thought, because we are targeting one pollutant out of the two. There are two pollutants that are linked with the ozone production, because it's a secondary air pollutant produced in the air. So we thought that maybe we have to target the other pollutant as well. And that was the interesting policy-oriented message that we got out of the natural experiment we did in Singapore. And we published a review paper in the open literature. It's very well cited. So thanks for asking that question. Yes, of course. At the same time, another point I want to highlight, because we remained mostly indoors, we took for granted that our indoor air quality was good, but it
Right.
was not the case because we did a lot more cooking than usual. We also used a lot of chemicals, for
Right.
example, disinfectants, and we
Right.
also used a hand sanitizer. And so we have a lot of chemicals being
Wow, that's
emitted from a
interesting.
variety of activities within indoors. But at the same time, people who are used to having air conditioning system on, they used air conditioning system throughout 24/7.
Right.
So the electricity demand increased, and we more increased the emissions of pollutants from power plants, apart from deterioration of indoor air quality. So the message we got out of that is we have to study both outdoor and indoor air pollution concurrently
Mm,
because we spend 90% of the time primarily indoors. It could be the
Right.
occupational environment, or it could be the domestic environment, or we could be using public transport or whatever. So it's very important to improve indoor air quality apart from outdoor air quality so
Wow.
that we can minimize our exposure to all kinds of pollutants coming from a variety of sources that happen to be present both indoors and outdoors.
Wow. Okay. I never thought
fascinating.
about that, right? I mean, the
Yeah,
disinfectants in indoors. Okay, just to let you know, my there is no fan. I'm using a fan here, so I try to go natural as much as possible.
Same.
exactly. That's what I
No
did.
aircon here.
But yeah, and because you would think that hybrid working means more people at home, but then there are other things that happens as well. It does help. Like I guess like a conversation like this. Previously, we'll have to fly you in, Professor, and that's a
Yeah,
plane ride and all that, right? But now we can just do it over the laptop, right? Now,
Benefits of technology.
benefits of
absolutely.
technology. So I was talking about open burning a little earlier on, right? And of course, that's to clear land for agricultural users, and it's common in certain areas in the region. But also, you hear what's been happening in Australia and the US as well, right? So, and we've been seeing these countries battling wildfires due to climate change. So how can we prepare for this? Can we prepare for this?
Yes and no.
Mm.
It depends on how you look at it. As you rightly pointed out, Freda, and we do have open fires in several parts of the world
Yeah,
as part of the traditional agricultural practices adopted by farmers into the
yeah,
burn. That it's becoming more prevalent now compared to the past, mainly because of the concern we have over food security.
mm,
And so the farmers have to grow certain plants, will be important for us in terms of meeting our food security. So then the cheapest way of doing it is to go for slash and burn. And this is what is happening in developing countries. So
right,
my solution, my recommendation for such a problem is to go for prescribed fires rather than having wildfires. So it just you designate certain areas that need to be cleared. You do one thing at a time, rather than all farmers doing slash and burn at the same time. Then
mm,
it goes out of whack, out of
mm, mm,
control. So instead, you pick and choose places where you have to do such slash and burn activities. That way, we can control the spread of fires. So
right,
this is for agriculture. The other one you mentioned about wildfires
yes,
and
yeah,
happening in several parts of the world, mainly induced by climate change. So
mm,
as a result of ongoing climate change, and we have a very dry weather spell in several places. So we
mm,
have very little moisture in the soil,
mm,
and the vegetation also becomes much drier.
mm,
So then they are prone to undergo fires, especially in a very hot environment, and when you have some kind of lightning strike or whatever.
mm,
So what I would suggest in a situation like this is to study the historical patterns over the years as to when such wildfires are likely to occur based on the past incidents that took place. And now we have the AI, artificial intelligence tools, machine learning tools. So
mm,
such advanced, AI-based tools will be very helpful in order for us to find out as to when such wildfires are likely to occur in the future.
right, right,
Then we have to get prepared as to how we can contain the spread of wildfires. Now, for example, we can put out fires, sort of sprinkling
mm,
water, throwing water from the helicopter or something like that.
mm-hmm,
So we have to adopt proactive measures. At the moment, what we are doing is more like a reactive measure.
right,
So we wait for a problem to occur, then we try to take actions, but then it's too late.
mm,
And so we need to have some mathematical predictive tools which will enable us to find out as to when such wildfires are likely to occur how spread, how widespread those fires could be, and what the impact will be, so that we can warn the public. Ultimately,
Right.
what's
Right.
important here is to protect the health of people, especially the sensitive, vulnerable members of the population,
Right.
and who might experience a variety of problems. So I
Mm.
would say coming up with the predictive mathematical tools would be the key, followed by policy-oriented actions, and that should be triggered when we sense that certain fires are likely to occur before they go out of whack.
Mm.
Okay.
So, as Frida mentioned in the introduction, the WHO said this year that 99% of air quality around the world is still not meeting, good levels. So, I mean, we've talked a lot about, what contributes to air pollution, but what are some of the solutions?
Okay. First of all, what we seldom realize is the amount of air we breathe every single day. Now, we breathe or inhale about 11,000 liters of air a day,
Wow.
about 7 to 8 liters per minute. But we
Wow.
consume only, maybe 3 or 4 liters of water. Okay. But we can purchase a bottle of mineral water from the supermarket, with very high quality. We cannot do the same with the air. Whether you're rich or poor, whether you live in developing or developed countries, all of us are exposed to air pollution, both indoors and outdoors.
Right.
And so that the question here is how to tackle this problem. So it requires a multi-pronged approach. There is no silver bullet.
Right.
And so we are looking for innovative, creative, transformative solutions that we need to implement as soon as possible through collective and cooperative efforts that would involve all stakeholders.
Right.
We are talking about governments, we are talking about corporations, we are talking about the citizens, living in a country. Basically, what it requires is the ownership of our environment. So, if the collective ownership of the environment is lacking, I'm sorry, it will lead to the tragedy of the commons. And climate change is a good example. So many of
Right.
us thought that, well, I have the right to improve my standard of living.
Right.
And therefore, I'll continue to do whatever I would like to do. So we had the insatiable desire for improving our standards of living rather than paying more attention to the quality of life.
Okay.
So the primary goal here is to improve the quality of life, for which we had to change our lifestyles. So as the saying goes, old habits die hard. Sometimes they never die. We
Yeah.
continue to do the same thing again and
Yeah.
again.
Right. we, we
Yeah.
we we do things as convenient, right? At the end of the day,
Yes.
as much as I
Yeah.
mean, me, like, as much as I say, oh, it's about being sustainable, everything, but we convenience wins,
Yeah.
unfortunately, right? And
Yes.
I think to be mindful of all these things, and of course, I should start selling what bottled air.
Yeah. New business idea, guys.
And also portable air purifier.
Right, portable air purifier.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I
uh
have a one. I have one
okay.
actually.
Of course, guys, if you have any questions for Professor, please, just put that in the chat, and we'll get Professor address it. Now, we know that going green can also create opportunities, right? And or in this case, going blue. How can improving air quality boost economy? And should this be even more of an incentive? You know what I mean? So I don't know. Is it tourism? Is it what have you? How can why would people buy into this?
Yeah, that's again a great question, Freda. Thanks for asking it. Well, actually, again, there's a strong linkage between air quality and the economy. So when we sell consumer products, we don't account for the social cost
Right.
of air pollution. Now, particularly the health effects of air pollution are never taken into account. So then the companies are pretty much profit driven, and they would like to decrease the price and increase the volume of business so that they can make more profits. But at the end of the day, what we realize is that we have to, pay something like healthcare in support of the continued living of people, because we get premature mortality as well as morbidity in terms of increase in the incidence of diseases that I mentioned before, including cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. And so then we make more money, we also spend more money in taking care of the needs of the people. that they can live longer and stay healthier. And so we had to come up with a different kind of a formula, that is green economy that we are talking about. So the past economic structure into the take, make, use, and throw is no longer applicable. So we are looking for circular economy, green economy, and which requires green solutions and therefore green fuels. We cannot use fossil fuels anymore. So we have to switch to renewables. But at the same time, in terms of improving air quality, it's going to be a pull for us to improve our economy. So especially if we want to attract foreign investors,
Right.
in our country, whatever the country it is. And of course, the foreign investors will look for air quality as one of the deciding factors. And so if we can improve the air quality significantly and maintain blue skies with no secondary air pollutants being produced, and that is going to be an attractive feature of our economy. And therefore, that will attract more investors to make huge investments in our country. But at the same time, the reputation of the country on a global scale is going
Yeah.
to increase. So the whatever product that we make indigenously could be also sold elsewhere based on the kind of green labeling we have, the green mark scheme that we have followed in the built environment. And the country is considered to be greener and cleaner, and therefore it will further increase our economy in scale.
Right.
So that's going to be very important. Again, as you mentioned before, Freda, about tourism. I just
Yeah.
imagine, go to
Yeah.
a country which is kind of hazy almost throughout the year. You don't want to go there. But
Right.
on the
Yeah,
other
of
hand,
course.
if you have a blue skies, then
Yeah.
you go to a historical site, it can be a distant object. And so that's going to, increase overall value over that. And the tourism industry is going to increase significantly. So
Absolutely.
improvement of air quality is not only important in the context of improving public health, but also to enhance our economic growth in a greener way.
Okay, I got two questions here, but I'll just ask maybe I'll ask Andreas last. I think that's a very good last kind of question. But Supaya Pungamandam said, any thoughts how society could influence governments and politicians in aligning themselves and driving towards addressing cross-border cooperation in air quality improvement? Of course, we talked about Malaysia, Indonesia. We have this conversation.
Yeah. But again, we are talking about our environment,
Yeah.
our life, okay? And each of us is a stakeholder in that regard. And so we have a voice, to raise and share with the others, and of course, in a benign way. And so whatever, thoughts we have that we want to share with others should have a beneficial outcome. So that depends on how we communicate our thoughts. And whatever the way we communicate our thoughts should have a lasting and positive impact
Right.
on whoever should hear your thoughts. So we need that kind of engagement. And now governments actually are going through the process of engagement before introducing any public policies,
Right.
because they will have to hear independent opinions from the public, because the policies are made to protect public health. So ultimately, the public have a say. So we have to share our thoughts and then influence the governments and corporations in a positive manner. In terms of influencing corporations, now we have the ESG reports, environmental, social, and governance reports. Now, almost all corporations have an obligation to prepare ESG reports and submit them that will indicate as to how green we are. And so likewise, the governments basically they bring all stakeholders together, and then sort of create an opportunity in the form of having a forum where we can share our thoughts and then come up with collective cooperative action towards improvement of both indoor and outdoor air quality. And that's the reason why in Singapore we got the Singapore Green Plan
Right.
2030.
Right.
So that is basically the opportunities being created for Singaporeans and partners from various sectors to co-create solutions for sustainability. And it cuts across several themes, including city in nature. So although Singapore is expanding into the built environment,
Yeah.
we also want to protect the natural environment. So we have this concept of having a city in nature. So Singapore is to be called a city of gardens or a garden city before, now
Right.
city in nature. So by having vegetation in
Right.
and around buildings, it will lead to long-term benefits in terms of cooling, in terms of improving air quality, aesthetic value, tourism value, it
Right.
goes on and on. So
Right.
that's a way to go. So certainly the public have a role to play. At the same time, we have to give up driving. I don't drive myself in Singapore, okay, for 26 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't either. But just a green plan. I mean, the country is planning to plant 1 more million trees to absorb 78,000 tons of CO2. And also, I think urban planning is really important in Singapore to keep enough. We're a small island nation, to keep enough buffer from industrial areas and residential estates. But I would just like to touch a little bit more about the economy, because we are going through a cost of living crisis, high inflation, all of these things. So if we don't improve air quality, how might air pollution and climate change actually increasingly threaten food production and food security? Because I know you touched on that a little bit earlier.
Yeah. That's another great question, Rian. And as the global population keeps increasing, we have about 8 billion people now, and we will have about 10 billion people, by 2050. And again, about 70% of the global population will primarily live in cities. So we are talking about having about 7 billion people living in cities. And of course, we got to feed all these people,
Yeah.
and, with healthy food, not just food,
Right.
healthy food. Nutritional value is very, very important. Now,
Right.
what's happening is that when the concentration of air pollutants keeps increasing, some of the pollutants that are classified as phytotoxic would affect the crop yield. One of them is ozone, which I mentioned before, that the bad ozone. The good ozone is up in the stratosphere. The bad ozone is closer to us, is classified as what do you call phytotoxic pollutant.
Right.
So
Right.
that gets into plant stomata. It changes the entire physiology of plants. So much so that evergreen plants are no longer evergreen. You can change the discoloration
Wow.
of plants. That's an indication the change, a drop in the crop yield. At the same time, the nutritional value also goes down. That's for air pollution. In the case of climate change, of course, you got the heat stress,
Wow.
you have extreme weather conditions, including droughts and floods and so on. So it affects the water budget. And so then the plants cannot continue to grow as they would do naturally under favorable weather conditions. It affects the food security. But
So
having
food
said
security
that,
really
food
is under
production,
threat.
absolutely,
Yes.
food production is going to be affected. Food price is going to increase, and food transportation and distribution will be affected because of change in supply chains. At the same time, food storage is also going to be influenced by both the air pollution and climate change. So we have to look at all these issues in a holistic manner and come up with a transformative solution in terms of giving up the use of fossil fuels, dirty
Right.
fuels.
Right.
And right now we're still using it. The sooner we give up the use of fossil fuel, the better it is, and food
Exactly.
security can be restored.
Right. Thanks, Professor. And of course, thanks everyone for your questions. I just want to end off with this question from Andrea. And I guess in relation to clear skies and all that, right? How can people in everyday life support sustainability efforts? Just the little things that we as individuals can do, apart from not driving.
Yeah, I think we got to rethink
Right.
about the day-to-day practices
Yeah.
that we are used to, because COVID-19 is a good example. So we thought about a lot of things. Basically, the most important thing is to go for sustainable consumption. So, we have this habit of manifesting our lifestyle by consuming, a lot more products, so that is an indication of how affluent we are and how
Yeah.
successful we are. So basically, material success is not an indication of the true success of individuals. And we have to go for minimalism, not materialism anymore. And that is the purpose of circular economy. So once we understand what circular economy is all about, then we have to realign our priorities so that we can contribute to circular economy by minimizing the consumption of our limited natural resources. That's the reason we have something called Earth Overshoot Day. So that's an indication of how soon we run out of our resources. And usually we run out of our resources in the middle of the year in July, before December. in 2020 because of COVID-19 and the change in our activities on a day-to-day basis, the Earth Day was pushed to August. So
Right.
that's an indication as to what we can do as individuals in terms of minimizing the consumption of our natural resources and enhancing, the outputs that are benign that will contribute towards sustainability through circular economy.
Right. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Professor, for your wealth of information and your sharing as well. Of course, I've been speaking to Professor Rajasekhar Balasubramaniam, Professor and Deputy Head Communication Engagement at the National University of Singapore. And thank you, everyone, for your questions. I'm Frida Liu.
Thank you very
Thank you so
much.
much, Rian and
I'm
Freda,
Rianne.
for
Lovely.
creating this forum on a
Thank you.
Saturday morning. I really appreciate your efforts. We need more people like yourselves,
Thank you
for us
so
to
much,
move
Professor.
forward. Thank you so much again. Thank you,
Thank you.
audience. Take
Well,
care. Bye-bye.
thank you.
Bye-bye, my professor.
This has been Causeway Conversations, and thank you so much. Really appreciate it.